So I will start. Okay, here we go. We are 100 around this virtual table. So it's an exciting morning we're going to have. So my name is Claude Smith. I'm the CEO of BNP Paribas in Norway, but it is in my capacity of the president of the French-Norwegian Chamber of Commerce in Oslo that I'm welcoming you to this exciting morning centered around the business and legal aspects of core innovation and cross-industrial cooperation between France and the Nordic. So the seminar is organized by the CCFN in collaboration with the French Chamber of Commerce in Sweden, the French-Finnish Chamber of Commerce in Finland, and last but not least, in tight cooperation with the law firms Vaughan, Avocats, Hjort, Horton, Hedman Partners, and Hellström. As we all know around this table, innovation has been at the center of the cooperation between France and the region for years. It was right more than a century ago when Swedish capital, French capital, helped the Norwegian adventure Yara, which created one of the world's largest fertilizer industry. The job that had to be done at the time was to save Europe from hunger. Hunger, today, a lot of this issue has been solved at least prior to COVID, but we have today other issues to solve together. And of course, this is centered around ESG, around the climate. As we all know, we are in an emergency when it comes to climate change. And this, if we don't do anything with it, it will result in economic failures and social instability. We also see the contours of that today. So the scientific community in all the countries, France in the region as well, and globally has been working on climate scenarios. And the consensus is that we collectively need to limit temperature rise to a maximum of 1.5 degrees in the years to come, and by 2100 to protect our planet. And there is no plan B. So this requires alignment across countries, alignment between schools, between research, political, industrial, legal frameworks, and of course the financial community, which I represent, is key in that sectors. And this is why we as BNP Paribas has joined a large group of banks in the Net Zero Banking Alliance to make sure that we contribute actively in this venture, which we will hear a few examples later on this morning. Because indeed on innovation, whether it is related to climate or not, a lot is happening in the Nordic region. Some of you may know that Stockholm now is the third European tech hub after London and Paris, measured in capital invested. Helsinki comes very high on that level as well. Copenhagen, Malmö as well. And a lot is happening in my currently home country as well. You may have heard, all of you, about the Northern Light Langskip project, which with money from the budget of the Norwegian Kingdom, but also European funds, is working on the largest carbon capture storage adventure in the world, actually. And it's all happening with cooperation between France, between the Nordics, to reach this, because CCS, carbon capture, is important in the energy transition. And of course, it is. We're going to hear about some industrial experience this morning. but all this is happening now. So we as bankers, we want to support this innovation, and the French, Norwegian, Swedish, Finnish, and Danish Chamber of Commerce are also active in that area. We as bankers, we look at technical risk, we look at commercial risk, we look how innovation is complying with ESG challenges that we all have. We look at how robust innovation is, and looking at how robust innovation is, and what and how innovation will help the companies reach their targets. Of course, we look at financial risk, but legal framework, how robust the model is, how the partners are working in the environment, which is more and more complex, more and more international, is key. And this is why, together with the Chamber of Commerce, we thought this was an excellent topic this morning. So with this, just as a small introduction, I would like to introduce the moderators of this morning exchange, and I will leave the word to them afterwards. So we have Alexia Colson-Duparchy, who is a former international trade and finance lawyer. Alexia has a career and as expert lawyer that brought her to Montreal, London, Cape Town, Abu Dhabi. She's now based in Paris and runs her business, B.Right Brains Co. That's a wonderful name, because brains is what we need. Coaching and supporting lawyers in supporting entrepreneurs and business in all across countries. That's Alexia, one of our moderators. The second moderator is Thomas Fernandez-Boni. Is an international French lawyer, 20 years experience in assisting foreign clients in their business in France and French companies. And he is partner of Vaughan Avocats, and it's a recognized international French international business based between Toulouse and Helsinki. Finally, before I leave the word to Alexia and Thomas, I hope also this seminar will allow you to create connections. This is part of the co-innovation. And yesterday I attended the French Tech seminar organized by the Swedish community. And I would like to, before leaving the word to Thomas and Alexia, to invite you to join the French Norwegian, the French Swedish, the French Danish, the French-Finnish communities through the Chamber of Commerce, to exchange with your peers and to continue the discussions that we have today. So without any further ado, Alexia and Thomas, I'll leave the word to you, and enjoy the seminar this morning, all of you.
Thank you very much, Claudine, for this very interesting introduction. I'm going to start just, as you can see, I mean, I would like to welcome everyone, I mean, today for this webinar. As you can see, I mean, in Helsinki, actually, based in Helsinki, and you can see behind me, it's a sunny Helsinki. Welcome you to this webinar, which is a good news. We're going to start with a very, very tight schedule today. We're going to try to keep it in the time frame. So the first roundtable will be a business corporate roundtable with three companies. One, everybody knows, it's an iconic Swedish group from Gothenburg, a champion of technology, champion of innovation, that is to say Volvo. The second one is a French group, also a very worldwide recognized innovative company, is Alstom, with a strong presence in the Nordic countries, in all the Nordic countries. Alstom is everywhere, in Denmark, in Sweden, in Norway, and in Finland. And last but not least, we have a Finnish international mid-sized company. And I think when we decided to set up that webinar, with Ludovic Kobe, which I thank also for organizing this webinar. He made things very interesting to have also the vision of a Nordic country, a Nordic company doing business in France. So we will have the general manager of Enersense, which is an international Finnish group doing business in France, and the feedback and the experience in that. So I'll leave it to Alexia to explain the first speaker.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for planting the decor, and thank you, Claudine, for the general introduction. Very interesting indeed. Well, may I suggest that we go straight for it and that we start with our first speaker for this first roundtable this morning, Mr. Jobson, who will represent Volvo here today. Volvo, that you all know here, one of the very first to introduce hybrid buses with lithium-ion batteries as early as 2009, and it has since been in the forefront in electromobility. Today, Volvo has a broad offer of battery electric buses and trucks, and Volvo has recently partnered with Aurora to develop and deploy autonomous hub-to-hub applications for North America. We've got here with us today Mr. Jobson, Edward Jobson, who's been with Volvo since 1989 and has been involved in spearheading the technology development. He's today a Senior Director of Strategy. Mr. Jobson, if you will, I will give you the mic so that you can share with us your presentation. And I will then ask you some questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share the position of the Volvo Group and our progress in the area of sustainability. We appreciate this opportunity very much. If I start, I have prepared a couple of slides, only two actually, showing the range. Will I show them, or will you show them for us? I will show them, yep. So I will share the screen, yep. Sure. Now you should see. Right. Do you see the screen?
Yes, perfectly well, thank you.
Thank you, yeah, excellent, yeah. So what is happening now? We have been having electric buses for a while for sale, and it's an excellent introduction of electromobility. Now, since half a year roughly, we are selling also electric trucks. So it's just starting now. The interesting thing now is that we are coming with an extremely broad offer, not just in Europe, but both in Europe and North America. We offer now the medium duty, as we call it in the Volvo Group. It's a bit unclear what is medium and what is heavy in different parts of the world, but it's up to 27 tons here. So it's pretty heavy. And within shortly, we will also introduce the real heavy duty as well, which is on the picture here. So what is a technical challenge here? Of course, it is a lot of batteries on board. So that is something that is being worked on. The sustainability of batteries is not taken care of, but it's regulated in the European proposal for legislation or regulation, actually. So it's something that is being worked on, and in the European community, this development is taken very seriously. So we will be guided by the regulation, but we will also add additional, for the Volvo Group, and additional Volvo qualities to the environmental and sustainability offer here. So it's securing the new. We see this as a coming paradigm shift. We don't think this is something that will go away by itself, so to speak. It's something that needs to be taken care of seriously in every single step. So here we have challenges, and I understood that it is of interest for many of the colleagues in the forum here to understand what is the momentum, which are the technical challenges. So I will go dwell a little bit extra on that part here for the sake of the dialogue that is coming. Heavy trucks, of course, a lot of power is needed. So the electric drive is another challenge that is of course, for everybody in this business, cost, weight, everything, getting the power in place. We have solutions, of course, that we are quite proud of, and we think that we are spearheading the market also in electric trucks now by being the first offering a wide offer. So it's not that because we have a wide offer does not mean that not further can be done. So there are challenges ahead of us, both on battery side, on drivetrain side, on the electrification in general. And we expect this will take off the next 10, 20 years. This will be something that will evolve, and innovation will be needed. Sustainability issues, magnets, for example, in permanent magnet motors often have rare metals, and of course the rarer, the more energy goes into the production and so on. So those are targeted areas that we think are quite important. I think that I will keep it a bit short here to give room for more questions. I will also say a few words about the automation side here. This is when we go to automation, electrification is a natural part, but it's not that it has to be electrified, but it's a natural development that you take this step in parallel. Like in this example, you see this is an electrified, autonomous, gigantic. What do you call it? The barrel thing that you're using in your garden. So the point with being autonomous is that you can scale it differently. So you can have many small rather than one big, that where the payment for the driver is the main issue. When it's autonomous, you can think differently. The tonnage on the road is lower, of course, when it's smaller, and so you get through in the environment in a different way, or in a better way, since the weight is lower. You get access to different places, to other places. So here, when you go to automation, the safety, security issues are central. The machine interface, how do you instruct it? How do you get the autonomous machine to the right place? All those questions where you have cameras, you have radars, you have lidars, it's called as like a laser camera. All those equipments are important to take us further steps. So speed of transfer, Wi-Fi or converting signals to compact and easy to transfer signals. Things like that is innovation that is requested for the future. So I think this, to keep it short and give room for more questions, I think this is like a taste of what is happening, and this is something that is a reality for us, something that we are offering. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Jobson. I do have a first question for you, actually. You said that although Volvo has a wide range of offer right now, there's still room for more to be done. And you mentioned a few areas, but what kind of other industries would you consider to be strategically relevant to Volvo in order for Volvo to cross-pollinate? And you know,
I mean, one industry that we are getting dependent on is, of course, the power industry, getting a sustainable electric power to the places where the vehicles are. In an ideal future world, I mean, the electricity comes to the vehicle. For the cars, which are, I'm on the AB Volvo, the commercial vehicle group, so those are different companies, but to take the most obvious example from the car side, the car is parked somewhere. That's where the electricity should be charged, and preferably fully automatically in a distant future. So it should just happen. So we want to connect, inspire the electricity industry to get into this development and distribute more energy, invest in more sustainable energy, and support in building this electric grid that is now needed for the future sustainable vehicles.
Yeah, and another question that I would like to ask you very much, and which would really cast a light on your experience with foreign manufacturers, you know, looking at your current partnerships, corporations, at your past partnerships maybe as well. I'd really like to know if you find any barriers, whether it's business barriers, legal, cultural, technical, anything that you would have observed like that, and if you have any advice that you can share with us to optimize the chances of success of a cross-border cooperation or partnership.
Oh, tricky question. I mean,
I put three questions in the same one. Sorry.
yeah, we are a global company, you know, and we adapt to where we are present. So there is a lot of local content rules in different parts of the world where we are forced into different types of cooperation. That is not the preferred way. So I think I'd rather not go into that part. I think what is cultural, I mean, seeing the same long-term goals is important to have a sustainable partnership. So when we have the same, as we heard from the banking here, when we see that the sustainability adds value to the business, that is also commercially interesting for us, for the customers, for our financiers. Of course, it's easier to find the same projects, or how should I put it, the momentum is and that is independently of where we are in the world. But to get to how do we I mean, there are cultural differences. Obviously, the Paris Agreement is a milestone here, and if we can handshake, yes, we see sustainable targets, and the science-based way of working is the way forward. If we agree on that, then we have already gained 80% of what is needed to come in place. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, you know, after discovering through your lens this iconic Swedish group that is Volvo, I would like now to turn the spotlight to Alstom Group, an iconic French group. If you don't mind, thank you. I was just going to ask you, Mr. Jobson, if you could switch off your presentation. Perfect, thank you. So I'm now going to call to the screen our next speaker, Mr. Didier Lapalus, who represents Alstom here. Alstom, a French group which offers a wide range of products in mobility, rail mainly, but also some e-buses. And it goes from fail-safe signaling to trains. Alstom is quite flexible and can provide its products and systems individually or on a turnkey basis. With us today, we have Mr. Lapalus, who's been working for Alstom since 1999 and has been tender director for Norway since 2015, I believe.
That is correct. Yes, thank you much. I would like to also share my screen. And that should come quite soon. Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. So yes, I'll give a couple of words on what is Alstom really. We had quite a big change early this year, because in the world of railways suppliers, there are some big players. Alstom was one of them, but we just acquired one of our serious competitors, Bombardier. Bombardier is now part of Alstom, and that makes us quite a significant group with 75,000 employees worldwide. So it a lot of people, but the purpose of it's really now we have a critical size to be able to do much more efficient R&D. That's obviously not just a business side that matters, but with such a weighty R&D is going to be much more targeted, focused, and to the point. We have we are an engineering company, basically. So yes, we sell products, but a lot of systems. And specifically for the area, in Alstom, we are divided geographically, and Nordic and Russia is one, what we call cluster. So I'm not going to talk about the Russian part, because our approach there is quite different from the rest of the Nordics. We just have a share in the main manufacturer. But in the rest of Nordics, the combination of the former Bombardier and the former Alstom remains a significant weight. We have more than 2,000 employees. We operate not just as designers and manufacturers, but also in what we call depot. That's where we maintain the trains, basically, because in our portfolio, we sell signaling system, we sell trains, but we sell a lot of maintenance of those, and those need to be local in what we call depots. I'm also mentioning here that we have some innovation centers. Of course, in a group such as Alstom, you have innovation centers in different places. Some are purely historical, but also for proximity reasons, some are more relevant. And to focus on that, I think we need to talk about the various profile of what we do. When we talk about trains and the various components of trains, you know, traction being a big one and so on, what we are usually doing is we are designing and manufacturing those in very dedicated areas, whereas locally where we sell, the job is more about test and commissioning, offering warranty, and then subsequently to services. When we sell signaling and integrated system, there is more of a share of what is done centrally and what is done locally. We design the generic solutions centrally, in some center of excellence, but there is a much higher weight on what is local in the country where it's deployed. There is a lot of system engineering taking place locally, and there is also what we call application engineering. I mean, configuring the generic solution to a specific country or city. And there is always a notion of rollout installation, whether it's train or whether it's tracks. It's always something that needs to be local. And finally, the other profile of what we do is what I call services, roughly speaking, maintenance. That is purely, almost purely, local. So you see, depending on which part of the métier we're looking at, we need to be very central to be super efficient. When you talk about platforming, it's mostly central. But when you talk about services, it has to be local. So I think that's important because that impacts also why we have some sites within the Nordic and why the manufacturing is in some other places. So as the topic was cooperation, I was thinking that to explain what we mean by cooperation is really to make a distinction between development, which is where you need to find new ideas, innovation, and so on. There is cooperation in commercial partnership to address certain market. And finally, there is also cooperation in developing new competencies where needed. So if I take the first one about development, we have in Sweden this site in Västerås where we develop green traction, so-called green traction, road electromobility. By the way, we had also some endeavors together with the Volvo trucks on that, trying to get some technology from the tramway world applied to the trucks, and some eco-design and manufacturing, because sustainability is not just the trains running on electricity, it's also how you manufacture the trains, what are the components within it, and so on. So that's one areas where development we will be looking for cooperation. The other one is more centered about what we call rail control or signaling, where we have multimodality and flow. This is really the digital tools trying to optimize the various means of mobility at our disposal. For instance, multimodality could mean for a given city, how do we synchronize the metro flow, timetables or passenger flow with the buses, with the Uber, with the concert in the city, with the police or fire brigade in case of incident. This smart city total vision is something that we are working on within our signaling department. Autonomy, much like Volvo described, we also have autonomous trains, metros. Some days we will have autonomous freight trains. And as technology is evolving, we use more and more radio communication to be optimal in our throughput of trains. But it comes at a penalty, which is we need to deal with cybersecurity. And cybersecurity, you can go from being extremely cheap and offer nothing to extremely expensive by going overboard. So we are trying to find the right balance. So those are development areas where Alstom does not do everything alone. It goes for partners. And I will give you a couple of examples how we proceed with that. On commercial partnership, we have several ideas that needs to be developed to address the need of our customers, which are states or cities, but we can't do everything ourselves. And you need to bring value to the customer, so it's not always what you already have on the table that might be extending the kind of offer. Oslo Stockholm 255, which is a project to have a high-speed line between Oslo and Stockholm in less than 2 hours 55 minutes, compared to 5 or so hours today, will involve different actors, public entities, private entities. So that's also an example of cooperation. And the final one is about competence. It's all good, but we are not just taking people from our center of excellence based in other places and just decide that they are enough to deliver everything. We need local competence, just not hiring people or stealing from the competition. We need to develop it. So we also partner with universities and such entities. So in illustrating what we mean by cooperation and development, there are a lot of networks to be explored, and this is kind of the various networks we belong to, the people we're talking to. On this slide, what is important is the number of people which are involved, and please notice, if you know them, that we are partnering not just with different technology, but also with our own competitors, because in order to have the industry progress, you don't invent everything against your competitors. Sometimes it's quite relevant to team together to make the industry go forward. It's also noticeable to see that the customers, there are some agencies that are funding R&D. So Europe, well known for that, there is a process we call for tenders. Trafikverket, which is the infrastructure manager in Sweden, is also having this duality of being both a sponsor for R&D and a customer at the same time. And finally, the key word here is we have joined this network which is matching the big, large, heavy, slow-moving companies like us with smart startup companies that bring in some very innovative ideas. I'm just listing here a couple of topics on which we are working. I'm not going to do in detail, but a lot has to do with green traction, battery. Some has to do with engineering, the way we design things, such as model-based engineering, as an alternative of the old ways. Test centers being more and more automatized and open. So we have our own test centers, but it is now getting open to anybody who wants to use test facilities. And of course, like a lot of people, everything that has to do with big data, predictive maintenance, and so on. In terms of innovation, we talked also about batteries. You need to know that in Alstom, we are not dogmatic about which alternative energy is needed. So we both have solutions with batteries or with hydrogen for trains. We do believe there is a room for each one of them. Typically, we advocate that for long distance, hydrogen is more fit because you fill up the tank in one city, in Oslo, and you can go up to Trondheim, whereas electric, with the given state of the technology of batteries at the moment, is more linked to shuttle services, this type of thing. But anyway, there is no dogma here, and we cooperate with many people, specifically in Norway, which are both entities that are helping the R&D, but also Nel, which is a very good producer of hydrogen. Commercially, I mentioned, so Oslo, Stockholm 255. The important thing here is to see that this is not just a technical project where Alstom could provide laying tracks and selling trains to run on it. It involves a lot of parties and mostly the municipalities along the route that could be created, reusing a large portion of what already exists. So the state or the infrastructure manager in Sweden would be involved. So you would have public-private partnership, and the whole model would change. Instead of the state investing, the model would be pay-per-use. So you can envisage many different operators running on that. So this is debated at the moment. So this is not something that is actually in existence, but in terms of cooperation, we are investigating a lot of potential models there. And the final point I wanted to make is about developing a talent pool. We are cooperating with universities, as I mentioned. We are helping master students to develop their thesis. They work on topics related to what we do, obviously, but that's to us a good way to both secure more people coming to work for us, but also to have new bright ideas about potential innovation. And we use also the VIE program that is run by Business France and Norway, run by the Chamber of Commerce, where we get quite a number of people listed here. You can see that we have 7 in Norway, 7 in Denmark, 1 in Sweden so far, but that's something that is really working for us, and we will pursue that line as well. That's what I wanted to mention on my part. I hope that that fits what you were looking for.
Thank you very much for this walk behind the stage, or walk behind the scenes of Alstom. It's very interesting because time is quite a constraint today and every day, really. I only have time for one question for you, but because you really mentioned the importance of focusing on the region, on local work, could you tell me, in your experience, what are the regional specificities when it comes to setting up partnerships in the railway, well, in the mobility industry, really? And sorry, we'll not have time for the highlights or the key specificity.
Yeah, very quickly. First, in most of the other countries I know, most suppliers like us are expected to come up with the R&D to deliver the innovation. In Sweden specifically, the customer is both this R&D sponsor and a customer. So that creates something which is a bit tweaked, and they proceed by purchasing through frame agreements. Say you are going to be the supplier for the next 7 years or so. The other countries, specifically Denmark and Norway, very recently, they proceed by turnkey approach. Okay, so they buy a new system and they are not an expert about engineering, they wanted to operate it. So the approach is quite different. And contractually speaking, that also makes a difference, because in Sweden, it goes by commodity almost, through frame agreement. Denmark, Norway are more through those system package, turnkey package. And Finland, the little experience I have is they are very much inclined to having contract in the form of alliances, meaning with a pain gain mechanism. That is something we see in very big turnkey things, but it seems like Finland is more attracted to that, even for smaller scale project.
Thank you very much for this, and thank you for making it concise and yet very interesting. Our next guest speaker is Christophe Jovet from Enersense, but I will let Thomas introduce him. Thomas, if you will.
Thank you, Alexia. Yeah, we are on time, which is good, because we got lawyers, waiting after, so we don't want to mess with lawyers. So let's be, I will introduce you, Christophe Jovet. Christophe is a general manager of Enersense. Enersense is an international Finnish group operating in 40 countries like Estonia, Finland, of course, Russia and France. And they set up a French subsidiary 3 years ago. And Christophe has the joy to become the general manager of the French subsidiary of this Finnish group last year. So we'll give his experience and the challenges he has faced developing the business of Enersense in France. Christophe, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Thomas. We're quite different to the two first speakers in the sense that we're a much smaller company. Enersense is a 2,500 people company. It's a 250 million euro company, which is really small for the French market, which is, well, quite significant for the Finnish market, considering the number of people and the difference of the two countries. We are not an innovator company like the two first one. We are a doer company. We're an enabler company. We work mainly in the decarbonated environment, promoting the fact that we are an energy transition enabler. What does it mean? It means that we mainly work in the environment which is taking into account anything but the fossil energies. We work in the nuclear environment, pretty much. We do work in renewable energies. We are pretty strong in wind power. We've done work in the solar environment and in other type of renewable energies. And we intervene in all the environment which is going to enable this promotion of low or zero emission society. We're working in electrical grids. We've done a lot for EV electric vehicle charging stations, and we've been pretty strong in Finland, Sweden, a bit less Norway on this subject. More recently, Enersense has decided to go west and to invest in Western Europe and mainly in France 3 years ago, mainly in the nuclear environment and the wind power environment, where we are now established. We've been established and we've been working for 3 years with a success which is now established, but which was not the case. Maybe I could share our presentation on that. Where is it? Well, I can't find it. Why? Where it should be here. Okay. Anyway, I'll try and go forward. I don't know why it has stopped. Anyway, doesn't matter. Let's go forward. one of the most probably interesting thing in this testimony is the fact is the experience of a middle-sized or even small-sized company compared to the others, coming from Nordic to a Western. Yes, thank you very much, because I had lost it. It's pretty nice. It's in fact the return on experience of Enersense in France, which has been quite a difficulty at the beginning. To be quite honest, I've been recruited in this company to turn around the French business, because it has been established at the beginning, following I would say a Nordic and more particularly a Finnish mindset about business, which is much more simple in the way to handle business than the complexity of French, in terms of administration, in terms of legal, in terms of fiscal mindset, and which made things difficult for the company to be established at the beginning. We're living, at least in France, in a country which is coming from Napoleonian way of working, and which makes it quite difficult for foreign company to be able to establish. And the main testimony that I can give is really about that. There is a big interest in being local, and we've experienced it in Enersense, taking into account that we've tried to establish in the UK, we've tried to establish in Germany on a project basis, but has not been very successful because of the fact that we were not local. Being local in France has been a success, but one of the main return on experience we can have is all the following. First, you have to make it right at the very beginning, in terms of administration, in terms of legal aspect, which may not always be the first things to consider when you're really getting into creation and establishing something new, but which turns to be quite painful if you're not doing it correctly, at least in this part of Europe. So first, be local. Secondly, establish it right, build it right from the very beginning. I know it could be quite time-consuming, or considered as quite time-consuming when you want to establish in a country, and particularly in France, but it will save you a lot of time after that. Thirdly, and has been evocated by my two predecessors, you cannot succeed if you don't build cooperation and in certain way a real ecosystem. Of course, in terms of lawyers and advisors and everything, but in your own work, in your own environment, you have to build cooperations, and we've done that pretty much with companies about our size, but which have been also enablers for us to establish correctly and to spread, at least on the French market. And fourth, maybe lesson to be learned from our 3 years of experience in French, which is now successful because for the first time we've been pretty much successful and profitable, which was not the case before. Last point about the human aspect of things. You have to get the right people at the right place and at the right moment. People and expertises are key. You can get them from on a European basis, but the minimum is be sure that on your project, on your basis you want to establish, you have the right persons. Basically, that's it. You'll see that in I made two slides on this return experience at the end of our presentation, but that's basically the kind of lessons we could learn from a mid-sized company getting involved in Western Europe and particularly in France. Alexia, is there anything that you would like to be developed, or Thomas?
Yeah, I think we got a bit of time for a few questions. I don't know if some of the participants have some questions also. I mean, don't hesitate to send it by on the chat. I've got. I mean, I live in Finland now. I mean, half of my time, so I understand when you say the Finnish mindset, which is quite different than the French mindset. And as a French general manager, I guess you need to report to your Finnish directors. And I think it would be interesting. I mean, if you can tell us some experiences of the main topics or challenges that, can I say, that came as a surprise to your Finnish bosses. I mean, I think it's interesting for the Finnish audience to understand maybe some topics or some matters that were quite surprising to them because it's a very specific French topic, for example.
The cultures are absolutely different. You're talking about a culture which is the French one, which is very much into the affect and the wording and the capacity to express itself. And on one hand, and on the other end, which is very much administrative in the sense everything has got to be written. Whereas in Finland, at least, we're in a culture of little talk. I've been recruited in a mail with 3 sentences, and in each of the sentences there were not more than 5 words, and that's exactly what's happening every day. And when you're dealing with a Finnish manager, the word is absolutely gold. When he gives you is okay, let's go, that's it. You don't need a mail, you don't need a contract, you don't need any kind of administrative engagement. Once we agree on one thing, we go, that's it. And we don't need to speak about it for hours, like it could be the case in France. And even when we agree, we may come back to the subject. Yes, I've thought about it, but maybe it could not be that, it could be different, which is absolutely the same kind of behavior and way of management in Finland. So yes, it was quite a significant shock for me in terms of culture and management behavior.
And I think just to jump back on what you're saying, I mean, for me, I advise also foreign clients, and they know. I mean, it's gonna make the transition with the second legal roundtable. I think, for example, employment law sometimes is very specific in France, and for Nordic people, I mean, it's a complete different system, and when you need to take a decision regarding an employee, a French employee, or negotiating with unions, is something very, very different in France than in the Nordic countries, and especially in Finland.
Yeah,
and I guess you must have experienced this kind of situation.
Absolutely. Yes, very different. Now, closing the debate, well, at least from my side, on a positive side, which has been really much recognized by the Finnish management, was a capacity to innovate, the capacity to always put into questions everything which has been launched, and to try to find every time different different solution, different way of acting, different way of solving the issues. And this is pretty much recognized by at least our Finnish headquarters.
Thank you very much, Christophe. That was very interesting. And I give the floor to Alexia for the legal roundtable. We're on time, even in advance. 1 minute in advance.
Incroyable, mais vrai. Well done, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all the speakers. That was very interesting, and thank you for keeping very short.
Yes, and now should we move on to the second roundtable then? As you promised us, Thomas, a bunch of lawyers, but very interesting lawyers with quite a few things to say. And we're going to take this time to contrast the situations, the legal situations between the Nordics and France. But I believe that before we dive straight into the topic, we've got a short introduction. Anna, I believe.
Yes. Yeah, from our friend from Hjort, from Norwegian law firm Hjort. Yes.
Hi, it's Thomas speaking. It's
Sorry, Thomas, not
yes.
Anna indeed.
Well, sorry, only a man this time. It's very interesting to get an insight into the experience and views of large players such as Volvo and Alstom and Enersense, and it's obvious that preparation is essential before starting up a business in the new market, and the Nordics is just the same as anywhere else. And the interesting thing is that even though we share much of the same legislation, we share the same culture, some of it at least, and there's a long tradition for a Nordic cooperation, as well as if we often see that people tend to think that we all speak Scandinavian. There are still differences in both business culture, as we've heard, and legislation, and that needs to be taken into account. So this is the theme for this second roundtable, the legal framework in the Nordic. We will give you a brief introduction of the legal areas, highlighting some corporate and employment issues to be aware of when entering into the Nordics. We will begin giving a Norwegian introduction, and then our colleagues in Sweden and Denmark, Finland, and then last France will then supplement with their point of view and their takeaways on this. Yep.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Thomas, for this introduction to this second roundtable with a very legal focus, legal yet practical. So let me ask you the very first question, a general one that I believe will be of interest to many people here today. So I would like to set up a business in the Nordics. What do I have to look into? What should I be thinking about in terms of corporate, contract law, tax law? What the difference between the different jurisdictions that are in the Nordics? Thomas, if you don't mind taking the microphone again and walk me through that, what would happen in Norway?
Thank you, Alexia. Norwegian company legislation contains very few restrictions and disadvantages for foreigners. And in general, Norwegian rules and registrations are made very easy for establishing new business in Norway. And in Norway, you may choose between using a local branch, or you could set up a Norwegian entity. Both sets are easy, the rules are clear, and the registration well adopted. And in general, we recommend that for foreign companies, you establish their business through a Norwegian limited liability company, an AS. This only requires a minimum share capital of 30,000. There is very few requirements for the bylaws. You only need one board member that is a EU citizen. It doesn't have to be a Norwegian. Of course, the quick way to do this, and this is important to remember, is that buying a shelf company that you have in a lot of countries. The important thing there is that in Norway, a shelf company will not be delivered with a bank account, meaning that to open a bank account in Norway, you will still, even if you buy a shelf company, have to do all the KYC with the banks. This often slows down the process. And it's important to remember that if you do engage in business in Norway, you do have an obligation to register in Norway. That's regardless of you having a foreign business, a company, or a local branch or a local Norwegian company. But it's also important, and that's the question you often get, is that this doesn't imply anything in terms of tax or VAT. This obligation to register is just a registration. And it doesn't mean that you become tax resident in Norway. And another thing for the timing issues that you should be aware of is that registration in Norway is based on electronic online registration, meaning that you need a Norwegian ID, electronic ID, or you have to do it on paper. This takes several more weeks and it costs a lot more. So it's something to think about before entering into. Under Norwegian, if you think of collaboration as they talked about in Volvo and things like that, it's in Norway you can do this by establishing a joint venture or some kind of partnerships. And I think that if you consider entering into a cross-border collaboration in Norway, we recommend that you establish a Norwegian subsidiary and use that AS to enter into the joint venture or being the partner in the partnership for several reasons I will come back to, such as tax. When it comes to contract law, there's a principle of freedom of contract in Norway, meaning you can basically agree on anything. There's very few contracts that require a specific form. There are very few mandatory provisions you needed. I mean, signing can be done electronically. I mean, have we agreed, then we've agreed. So it's quite simple. And as Norway is a part of the EEA agreement, most relevant European community laws apply in Norway. One thing to remember is that in Norway, you can have an agreement before anything is signed. That's important to remember. An oral agreement is binding, and Norwegian courts will depend on other things than the writing and the wording in the contracts, meaning that if you said something, you're bound by it. And it's important to remember that if you choose Norwegian law as governing law, there comes with a background law and rules on that gives the buyer, for example, very big warranties, even if something is sold as is. And when it comes to tax, I will be short on that. You will have an obligation to report tax when you do business in Norway. And if you collaborate in Norway, it's important to know that a collaboration, a joint venture, will be regarded as a limited liability partnership in Norway, and you will be taxed in Norway. I will leave it at that, I think, and then I will turn to my big brother in East Sweden, and Anna, and have her view on this.
Yes, thank you, Thomas. I think you forgot to say that Norway is not a member of the EU, but Sweden is. So that's the difference between our countries. But in other senses, we are very much the same, and many rules are similar in Norway and Sweden. So, for example, when it comes to investments by foreigners, we have also very few limitations and disadvantages for foreign investors. And like in Norway, the most common way to set up a business in Sweden is to do it by establishing a limited liability company, in Swedish aktiebolag or AB. And other ways to establish business is to open a branch office, and that's called a filial in Swedish. And for a limited liability company, the share capital is now 25,000 Swedish krona. Before it was 50,000 Swedish krona. So it's not a lot of money, but I know that in Finland, you don't have to pay anything. So that's also a difference. There are also other ways of conducting business in Sweden. You can, for example, establish a general partnership, that is a kommanditbolag, handelsbolag, sorry, a limited partnership, kommanditbolag, or a non-registered partnership, which is a so-called enkelt bolag. As in Norway, the company must register with the Swedish Companies Registration Office. And you also have to register with the tax agency if you conduct business. And then you register for VAT, the so-called F tax, and as an employer if you have employees. As in Norway, the easiest and quickest way to start up a business is to acquire an off-the-shelf company. And also the same, we assist clients in purchasing off-the-shelf companies, and that's normally a very smooth process. But there are some difficulties now in opening a bank account for foreigners. So that may actually take a few months even. So normally an off-the-shelf company can be up and running within just a very, very short period of time. But now with the difficulties due to the KYC and the money laundering regulations, it takes longer. And when it comes to contract law in Sweden, we have the same system as in Norway. It is the Nordic contract law tradition, and the rules are very similar. So you have a great freedom of entering into contracts, and there is a large flexibility. And as in Norway, you have a binding contract even if you don't have a written contract, for example. There are no form requirements, only when it comes to the purchasing of real property, for example. And regarding tax, you are liable to pay tax in Sweden when you start up a company. And this is independent of what type of company you establish. And the national corporate income tax rate is now 20.6% in Sweden, and that's from 1st of January 2021. And other taxes which you have to pay are, of course, VAT and social security contributions, which are pretty high in Sweden compared to other countries. And if you own real property, also real property tax. And the Swedish VAT system is based on the EU system, and standard VAT in Sweden is 25%. So I think I stop there and hand over to Finland and Kalle Pedak.
Thank you, Anna. To continue with Finland, I must say that Finnish corporate law is very similar what my colleagues have told about Norway and Sweden. Actually, Finland has traditionally followed very closely Swedish legislation, and in that sense, company law is very, very similar. Normally, foreign investors are using limited liability company as a form of doing business, and there is one difference, as Anna mentioned already, that in Finland you can nowadays establish a company without share capital. Another form is branch, which is used but not so commonly used. And the third possibility is to do business, especially in service sector and construction, actually without registration of a subsidiary or other entity based on EU service directive. But there is important to take into notice that if your activities are then based on a permanent basis, permanent establishment will be established, and it means that there is tax obligations and obligations to register in tax office, but not in company register. Again, about board, there is not many restrictions for foreigners, especially if you are from EU. There is no restrictions, but if you are not EU resident, then at least one person shall be in the board who has residency in EU or EEA country. Contract law is again very similar to the other Nordic countries. Nothing specialities in that sense. No formalities regarding contract forms. No notarizations needed as in some European countries. Contracts in Finland are very short. Normally only 1 or 2 pages contracts are very acceptable, except perhaps M&A transactions, which nowadays are following the Anglo-American patterns. About tax, again, Finnish corporate income tax is 20%, which is relatively compatible in EU, and VAT is harmonized as in other EU countries, and standard VAT in Finland is 34% at the moment. So I think that's basically what you shall know about Finland, and I think next in line is Denmark.
Thank you very much, Kalle, and thank you to everyone. Yeah, as you see already, there are many similarities in the Nordics when it comes to the corporate setup, and that also goes for Denmark. As with the other countries, the Danish company legislation contains very few restrictions and disadvantages towards foreign investors. Like the other countries, the most common way to do business is either via branch or by establishing a legal entity in Denmark. The most common types of legal entities in Denmark are the so-called APS, a limited liability company, or a private limited company, a so-called AS. But there's also other types similar to those you have already heard in relation to joint ventures and partnerships. It has become easier and cheaper to establish a legal entity in Denmark. To establish a private limited company, the so-called APS, the joint capital must be approximately 5,000 euro, and you don't need board members in APS. And for a limited liability company, the so-called AS, the joint capital is approximately 53,000 euro, and there you need 3 board members. You must register with the Danish Business Authority. It can normally be done online, and it is very quickly. As mentioned before, foreign companies can also or may also establish a branch in Denmark, and the branch is not a separate legal entity, but part of the same legal body as the main company. And for EU members, it is very easy and cheap to establish a branch in Denmark, as you only have to pay a minor fee. And as with the other countries, establishing a bank account might actually be the time consumer in Denmark. As for corporate law, well, Denmark has also incorporated all relevant community law. The Danish Contract Law is also based on the Nordic project, and there are many similarities in the Nordic Contract Acts. Denmark is also based on the principle of freedom of contract, subject to very limited restrictions. Also in Denmark, there is a principle of freedom of form, and an oral agreement is as binding as a written agreement. However, it is of course always a matter of documentation, so we do recommend written agreements. As for tax, well, when a foreign company has organized its activity through a Danish entity, the entity is liable for taxation in Denmark, and foreign companies are liable to Danish tax when they engage in activity that constitute a so-called permanent establishment in Denmark. The Danish corporate tax rate is 22%. Some consider that competitive. And the Danish VAT system complies with EU law, and the VAT rate is 25%. And uniquely, many other countries, Denmark has no double taxation for Danish companies with branches abroad. So I think that was the main issues for Denmark, and then I will turn the table to Thomas from France.
Thomas, will you contrast everything that we've just heard about the Nordic countries and tell us how things would be in France if we were to set up a business? Different doesn't mean that it's not attractive, though. Beware.
Exactly. Correct. I mean, first of all, it's not totally different. It's more similar than different, and we are a very attractive country. I mean, France, since the election of Emmanuel Macron, has become very attractive and competitive country for foreign investment. So I will focus just 1 or 2 minutes on the corporate taxation. There's one difference, especially for foreign clients who wants to explore the French market. You can set up a branch, you can set up a subsidiary. This one is more or less similar to what my colleagues just say from the Nordic countries. Another tool for foreign clients who want to explore the French market is what we call representation office, a rep office. Is if you want to start a commercial prospection, marketing, etc. If you want to see if your business is going to be successful in France, you can just create a rep office, and the advantage, there's no taxation on that. So you need to be careful. When you start having a commercial activity, you need to turn this rep office into a branch or a legal entity just to be submitted to tax. But you can start exploring the French market with that tool without paying any tax for 1 or 2 years, for example. This one is a difference. A second difference on the corporate side, we can do everything online now. It's been very painful 10 or 15 years ago, but now in France, everything is online. So my foreign clients, they say, oh, Thomas, how long will it take to register the company? How much it will cost me? It will take 3 or 4 days and it will cost you a couple of €100. So it's very simple, it's very quick, and it's not very costly to register your company or your branch in France. If you start a subsidiary in France, we go a very simple structure. It's called SAS, and there's no capital required minimum. So you can set up with €1, with €10, with 20,000 euros. It's very flexible on that. There's no minimum capital required. So for the corporate side, this is more or less the same as in the Nordics with some differences. On the taxation, I know that France has a very bad image on taxation. We used to be a very taxable, business country. It's not anymore. For the corporate income tax, there's a new reform. Now it's currently, it used to be 33% corporate tax. Is going to be 25%. So more or less in the same range as my colleagues, starting from next year. We have also in the taxation very incentive for the innovation and R&D taxation. For example, all the revenues from IP there's a flat taxation of 10%, only 10%. And also, if you want to start up your R&D department in France or a company only dedicated to R&D, there's a credit research tax of 30% of your expenses. So it's very attractive in France to innovate and do R&D in that country. Last but not least, the contract part is more or less the same as, for example, in Denmark. It could be written, it could be not written. Very common example we have from the foreign clients. Sometimes they have a commercial relationship or cooperation with a French company, with a French partner. There's no written contract, only orders, only invoices for 10 years. And they want just to terminate the relationship. You need to be careful in France. You cannot terminate an established relationship like this. You need to respect the notice period, even if there's no contract signed. And the custom in France is more or less 1 month of notice period for years of contract. For example, if you go 10 years relationship with no written contract with a French partner, we recommend to respect the 10 months notice period to terminate the relationship. So you need to have this one in mind when you start a collaboration with a French company and when you want to end up the commercial relationship with the French company. And that's more or less what I wanted to say on the corporate side. We are nearly on time.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everyone. So thanks to this roundtable, we are now more clued up on how to set up a business in your respective jurisdictions. But now we would all really like to know how to staff the business, how to hire. So could you tell me more, can you tell us more about employment, about mobility, since the idea is to organize as well systems cross-border? And before I hand over the microphone to Thomas from Norway, let me just tell everyone here that you will receive in the next few days a cheat sheet that will summarize everything that you hear during this second roundtable. So you will have those highlights that all of our lawyers here have shared with us so kindly. So check your inbox in the next few days. You will receive the summary, a cheat sheet. Thomas, let me not steal your time.
Hi, Alexia. It's Claude, actually, who is going to cover this. And I'm Claude from Norway. Claude with a French mother. Therefore, my name is Claude. But I'm a colleague of Thomas as well. So hello to everybody. So I will just quickly move on to the employment part and, of course, employment mobility. And as our colleague Anna in Sweden commented, Norway is not a member of the European Union, as everybody knows. But I believe even though Norway is perhaps still one of the best pupils in the European classroom, because we have more or less implemented all European directives so far, and employment law is not an exception. And in addition, we have a quite extensive legislation when it comes to employment law. I think that's quite the same in the Nordics, and also rather employee friendly, but at the same time, very predictable. It's very predictable to hire and fire. You know what you need to do. So it's not so difficult to handle after all. I will focus on some matters that you will need to consider when you are posting workers to Norway, which will typically be the case in the first part of a collaboration process cross-border. This is definitely not a crash course in the Norwegian employment law. That would not be possible within the time frame we have. First thing, work permits, normally quite a big issue. If you are a European Union citizen, you can work in Norway. There's no need for any permission. The only thing you need to do is to show up in Norway at the local police office within 3 months upon arrival and register yourself. For non-European Union citizens, then there is a requirement to apply for a resident permit. This is typically for skilled worker. It's not a difficult process. It just takes time. So you need to take that into consideration. And don't forget, we see that from time to time, that we have foreign employers who have already employed non-EU citizens in their country, typically, let's say in France. They have a work permit in France, but they still need to apply for a specific Norwegian residence permit also. They cannot rely on the French permission. Don't forget that. For tax and reporting, like my colleague Thomas already has commented on, don't forget the obligation to register with the Norwegian tax office, tax authorities. Both the employer and employee is as a starting point subject to pay tax in Norway. Of course, there's a lot of exceptions there, but the obligation to report still apply. So that is an issue to be aware of. So planning, again, is essential. This is typically nothing you should come up with a week before you plan to send your employees to Norway. For posted employees, Norway, like all the Nordics, have implemented all the relevant EU directives. And the system and principle is basically the same. So there are some Norwegian rules, local rules, that will apply for the employment relationship in Norway, independent, and even though the employment agreement as such is governed by the employment law in the sending country, for instance, French law. And the most important parts there to be aware of is, well, health, security, environment matters, that is governed by Norwegian law, but also working hour regulation, which in Norway is quite strict and also quite different compared to the other countries, Nordic countries. The same goes for holiday and holiday pay. Our legislation is quite different in all the Nordic countries. More or less same principle, but still quite different. We also have specific regulation for temporary agency work, and equal treatment and discrimination legislation also will apply in Norway. GDPR, much focus on that. Well, in Norway, we have, of course, implemented, not a big surprise, the GDPR. So I think you will feel home, more or less, in Norway also. But in addition, we also have national privacy legislation. And on the employment field, we have some specific legislation when it comes to monitoring measures, and such as email access, employers' access to electronic stored information, etc., which could be a minefield, where it's important then to be aware of that. You cannot just rely on GDPR, you just need to also rely on know the local legislation. But lastly, but not last, but most also very important, IP regulation. Of course, doing business, this is important when sharing knowledge, like we heard from Volvo, Alstom, Enersense, they are sharing, developing together. Sometimes they can even be competitors. IP clauses are essential. And this is, of course, also important for your employees for developing R&D, etc. Well, Norway has ratified many IP conventions. We are more or less aligned with the rest of the Nordic and European countries on this. Not big differences. We also have some background legislation as well. And we also have a mandatory legislation protecting employee inventions, but mainly ensure that they receive a reasonable compensation. I think that is the most important parts. from a posted working employee aspect. So I think I will give the speak to Anna in Sweden.
Thank you, Claude. Yes, Sweden has also ratified many intellectual property rights conventions, and the rules regarding IP are more or less the same as in Norway, so I will not go into that. As I am very much fond of the GDPR, I would just like to mention that the GDPR is, of course, directly applicable in Sweden, as Sweden is an EU member. And there has been a lot of discussions in Sweden on having a national law, because the GDPR opens up for the member states to have national laws regarding processing of personal data concerning employees. And we have had a lot of discussions, but no law has come into force yet. But I think the discussions will continue, and I would like to see a specific law on the processing of personal data regarding employees. So we will see what happens in that regard. And as in Norway, Swedish law is also very protective when it comes to employees, and our law is centered around collective bargaining agreements and the unions. And we have no minimum wage laws, but in a collective bargaining agreement, it can be agreed upon to have minimum wages. And as regards posted workers, Sweden has implemented the relevant EU directives, of course. And as in Norway, we have national specific rules on working hours, for example, holiday, equal treatment and discrimination, and parental leave. I think, as you said, Claude, there are some differences, and we say in Sweden that in Norway you go home earlier, you quit work earlier in the days, I don't know, but there are some differences regarding working hours. And before a posted worker starts to work in Sweden, the employer has to notify this to the relevant authority, which is the Arbetsmiljöverket in Sweden. And this has to be done except for when an employee is working less than 5 days, maximum 5 days. And when it comes to the trade unions and negotiations, you have to negotiate with the trade unions when you have a collective bargaining agreement, but also, and I think that's a difference when you compare to other countries, you have an obligation as an employer to negotiate with any trade union if you only have one member, one employee who is a member of a trade union, then you have an obligation to negotiate with that union. And this is in situations when there are larger business changes or changes of the employment terms, and of course in cases of redundancy. And as regards tax, both the foreign employee and the foreign employer will be taxed in Sweden. And there are some exceptions from this, but we don't have time to go into that now, unfortunately. But as Alexia said, you will get a short kind of handout and you will see what we have said here today. So I think I stop there and hand over to Finland.
Thank you, Anna. Regarding Finland, I think it's again very much a lot of similarities with Sweden, but perhaps one speciality is in Finland that collective bargaining agreements are mostly mandatory to all employers and companies in certain field, and basically most fields of business are covered with these mandatory collective agreements, construction, technology, retail, hospitality, to mention a few. And that means that all companies and also foreign companies active in Finland shall follow these minimum requirements which are set forth in collective agreements. And for foreigners can be problematic to understand all these requirements, because these collective agreements are available only in Finnish language. They are not translated into English language, and only summaries are available. So in that sense, the most important thing is to find out what is a relative collective agreement in your business field, and then learn what are these minimum requirements. And if there are contradictions between Employment Contract Act and collective agreement, then collective agreement is always prevailing. I think that's mainly what you shall know about Finland. Other parts are very similar, and also IP GDPR legislation is very similar what we heard before today. So thank you regarding Finland, and I think Denmark is next.
Thank you very much, Kalle. Well, yes, there are many similarities, but also differences when it comes to labor law. Denmark is also characterized by employee protective and extensive legislation, but at the same time very predictable. It's a good environment to do business. A major difference, especially in relation to Finland, is that collective agreements are not mandatory in Denmark. Companies are only covered if they are members of an employers association or if they have agreed to a collective agreement. Collective agreements are not generally applicable, and many, especially smaller companies, are not covered by collective agreements. There are no obligations to negotiate with unions if you're not covered by a collective agreement. For other areas, then I can say differently also, the protection against termination are not as strong in Denmark as in many other Nordic countries. It is actually easy to hire in Denmark, and it is easy to fire, and most employees are entitled to unemployment benefits. That's what we call the Danish flexicurity system. Also, legislation does not include minimum wages or regulation on overtime, etc. Minimum wages only apply if the company is covered by a collective agreement. As for holiday, I'll just mention we recently just got a new holiday act. It's quite difficult right now, but it will get better. So that's the most important thing to say. Also, employers in Denmark, they pay a very low social contribution rate, less than 1% per employee per year. So social security is mostly financed by the employees' tax contributions. So even if you consider that the salary in Denmark are quite high, then you should know that there are very limited add-ons on the salary. When it comes to work permits, EU citizens, EEA citizens, and Nordic citizens, they are free to reside and work in Denmark. Employers or employees from other countries must have a valid work permit before commencing work in Denmark. It normally takes between 1 to 3 months to get such a permit, and it depends on the type of work and the type of permit. As for tax, both the foreign employees and the employer are liable to tax in Denmark if they are engaged in activities with a permanent establishment in Denmark. And there's register, they must always remember to register. And also, if there's no permanent establishment, there are some register obligations as well. One important thing to note is that Denmark has a favorable tax scheme for foreign researchers and foreign key employees, and that means that they have a lower tax in Denmark and other tax advantages in Denmark. As for posted employees, Denmark has also implemented the EU directive and also the latest update, and there's a lot of rules that apply in Denmark that also applies to posted workers to Denmark. Please note that in relation to long-term posting, then after 1 year, posted workers will be covered by all Danish employment legislation. Hence, we have no minimum salary in Denmark. We have special legislation that allow for industrial actions against service providers in order to secure posted workers' remuneration comparable to Danish standards. And furthermore, social clauses in relation to public tenders are very normal. When it comes to consultation, then there's a general obligation to inform and consult with the employees or their representatives at the company if you have more than 30 employees. There are no co-determined rights in Denmark, but other obligations often appear in collective agreements. Just say that GDPR is also very important. It's the same in all countries. We have special legislation in Denmark also in relation to monitoring, etc. And the last thing is trade secrets. We have default legislation that protects employers, but I do recommend IP clauses in Denmark for many reasons. You can protect the company even more, that's one, and two, the employee will know the rules and what obligations the employee has, and that's, in my opinion, very important. The last thing is that we have the Danish Marketing Practice Act and the Danish Act on Trade Secret, which prohibits misuse of trade secrets and unfair competition, and that's very relevant in relation to employees leaving the business, especially if no restrictive covenants has been agreed. I think that's the most important thing for Denmark right now, and I will leave the floor to Thomas from France.
Thank you, everyone. I will actually steal the microphone between you, Jonas and Thomas. We are running out of time, and what I do recommend is that when everybody here receives the email in the next couple of days that will summarize all the points that have been discussed here today, then you will see the French angle there. We unfortunately are completely out of time, and I would like to take this 1 minute that I have to thank you all. I would also like to highlight the fact that I think what came from all the speakers that we had today, whether from a more business angle or a more legal angle, what we do see is that all these countries, this region and France are highly compatible. And yes, we do have big differences, cultural differences, and it's really a good thing, as it does make us quite charming just the way we are as a country. But from a legal, from a business, from all the more technical point of view, we are highly compatible countries and regions, and we are rather flexible places to do business. So this is me hoping to many cross-border companies and transactions and cooperations happening in the near future. I think we have maybe 1 more minute just for a word of a conclusion on a more general level.
Maybe
thank you.
Yeah, go on, sorry.
Thank you, Claude. I just wanted to wrap up the webinar and say that based on roundtable discussions, I think we can conclude that Nordic countries can be considered as one market with a lot of similarities, but at the same time, it's important to take into notice these certain differences, and especially in employment law sector.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kelly. I mean, we didn't have time for the employment law part for the French part, and it's true that there's some differences, yeah. And I would like me to thank Ludovic Kobe from the Norwegian Chamber, Virginie Ferraton from the Swedish Chamber, and Marie-Zoé Belon-Leitinen from the Finnish Chamber to have hosted us. Thank you very much to all of you. Maybe I think it makes sense to have like the Nordic people to close this webinar. If some of you want to have a final word, maybe Claude or Thomas from Norway.
Well, I think we can just say thank you for this interesting and interesting opportunity to discuss legal topics and listen to the big players in the market, how doing business and challenging what is challenging, but also the opportunities that we see. So we hope that everybody has at least had some useful 1.5 hour this morning.
I think this is it. Thank you. Have a nice day all. It's always a bit strange. Maybe someone from the Norwegian Chamber want to conclude or say a final word? I don't know.
So, thank you, Thomas. Just want on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce and our partners on the Nordic countries to thank you, especially the two moderators. So we'll keep in touch. Have a nice day.
Bye bye.